You're a doctor in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's capital. Your number one patient killer is cardiovascular disease and cancer. Now drive 4 hours north. You're in rural Tigray. Your number one patient killer is tuberculosis, starvation. Same country, completely different cause of death. Ethiopia is running 2 epidemics at once, and one of them is almost entirely invisible to the rest of the world. Ethiopia, nearly 139 million people, the 10th most populous country on earth, and the second most populous in Africa. Over 80 distinct ethnic groups call it home, with the Oromo, Amhara, Tigray, and Somali as the largest. Life expectancy sits at 67.3 years, actually higher than several countries we've already covered on this channel. A number that on its own would suggest real, steady progress. But here's the number that complicates that picture. Only 22.9% of Ethiopians live in a city. The overwhelming majority, more than 3 in 4 people, live rural lives, far from the hospitals, the specialists, and the diagnostic equipment concentrated in Addis Ababa. GDP per capita sits at just over $1,100 a year, among the lower income economies on Earth, even after 2 decades of some of the fastest growth on the continent. When researchers study what's killing Ethiopians, they don't get one answer. They get at least 2. And the 2 answers barely resemble each other. Before we look at the split, here's your true or false. True or false? Ethiopia has one clear leading cause of death, the same as most countries. Take a moment. The answer is false. Let's start in the capital. The Addis Ababa Mortality Surveillance Program tracked adult deaths in the city from 2007 to 2017, using verbal autopsy, a structured interview method used where formal death certificates and hospital records are incomplete. Over that decade, non-communicable diseases caused 62.8% of all adult mortality in the city. Cardiovascular disease alone, heart attacks and strokes, accounted for 27.1% of every single death studied. Cancer caused another 11%. This is a profile that looks like a wealthy, urbanized nation. Heart disease, cancer, the diseases of a long life, and modern habits. Now, go to rural northwest Ethiopia, a district called Dabat, roughly 850 kilometers from the capital. A separate, equally rigorous study tracked deaths there from 2007 to 2013. Communicable diseases caused 48% of all deaths, the single largest category by far. The top 3 specific killers: tuberculosis, HIV, and meningitis. And 83% of those deaths happened at home, with no clinical contact at all. Same decade, same country, one profile that looks like Germany, one profile that looks like the world 50 years ago. Let's go deep on the rural killer, because tuberculosis is a disease most people in wealthy countries think of as belonging to the past. It doesn't work like the fast-moving outbreaks that make headlines. TB bacteria are inhaled into the lungs, and in most people, the immune system manages to wall them off into small, dormant clusters. This is called latent TB, present in roughly 31% of Ethiopians, sitting quietly, causing no symptoms for years or even decades. But when the immune system weakens, from malnutrition, from HIV co-infection, from age, or sometimes for no obvious reason at all, those dormant bacteria can reactivate. They multiply slowly, steadily destroying lung tissue over weeks and months. The disease that results is nothing like a sudden outbreak. It's a chronic cough that won't go away, sometimes with blood, fever that comes and goes, night sweats, and weight loss so severe and so sustained that for most of human history, this disease was simply called consumption, because that's what it looked like happening to a person's body. Death, when it comes, is usually from respiratory failure, or because the body has become too weakened to fight off whatever infection arrives next. Here's what makes this genuinely difficult to accept. Tuberculosis is completely curable. A 6-month course of antibiotics cures it in the vast majority of cases. Ethiopia's national treatment success rate is actually 86%. Respectable, but still below the WHO's global target. The real problem is reaching people in time. In Ethiopia's hardest hit regions, treatment success rates drop to under 83%, driven by limited access to healthcare in remote areas, the socioeconomic weight of poverty and malnutrition, and long delays before anyone even starts treatment. And the trend is moving the wrong way. TB incidence in Ethiopia has risen every year recently, from 119 cases per 100,000 people in 2021 to 126 in 2022 to 146 in 2023. Researchers estimate that millions of TB cases worldwide go undetected every year, contributing to ongoing transmission. And detection itself depends heavily on whether people have access to information about the disease in the first place. Wealthier, urban populations get that information through television, radio, digital platforms. Rural and disadvantaged populations, overwhelmingly, do not. The clearest way to understand Ethiopia's transition is to watch Addis Ababa's numbers move, year by year, because researchers documented this shift with unusual precision. In 2007, communicable diseases cost 43.25% of adult deaths in the capital. Non-communicable diseases cost 49.95%. By 2017, just one decade later, communicable disease deaths had collapsed to 12.34%. Non-communicable disease deaths had climbed to 81.17%. That is one of the fastest, most completely documented urban epidemiological transitions recorded anywhere on the continent. And here's the detail that connects this directly to our last episode. Addis Ababa's crossover. The moment NCDs overtook infectious disease as the dominant killer had already happened by the late 2000s. Kenya's national crossover wasn't confirmed by government data until 2024. Ethiopia's capital got there roughly 15 years earlier. But rural Ethiopia tells a completely different story across that same window. There's no equivalent crossover in the data. Tuberculosis, HIV, and meningitis remain the dominant killers in studied rural districts throughout this period, with TB incidence nationally still climbing as recently as 2023. And then there's a third storyline, layered on top of both of these, that doesn't fit neatly into either profile: the Tigray War. From November 2020 to the 2022 ceasefire, conflict and famine devastated Ethiopia's north. The exact death toll is genuinely disputed, partly because the Ethiopian government restricted information gathering during the conflict itself. A peer-reviewed study from researchers at the University of London calculated over 102,000 excess deaths in Tigray during this period. Other research teams, using different methods, estimated the combined toll of violence, starvation, and lost access to healthcare at anywhere from 160,000 to over 600,000 people. Even after the 2022 peace agreement, follow-up research found that starvation remained the leading cause of death in surveyed Tigray households well into the following year. This is not a footnote to Ethiopia's mortality story. It's a third epidemiological reality running alongside the urban NCD transition and the rural infectious disease burden in the same country during the same years. If you watched our last episode on Kenya, this should sound familiar. And that's exactly the point. Kenya's entire nation crossed from an infectious disease-dominated death profile to an NCD-dominated one, confirmed in a single government report in 2024. Ethiopia isn't behind Kenya on that same single timeline. Ethiopia is running the Kenya of today's story and a Kenya of decades ago story simultaneously, split geographically within one set of borders. Addis Ababa looks like a country that completed its epidemiological transition years ago. Rural Ethiopia looks like a country that hasn't started it. And Tigray, layered on top of both, looks like neither, a region where war and starvation briefly became the dominant cause of death, in a way not seen at this scale in Africa since the 1980s. There's one more layer worth knowing about, because it's happening right now. In November of 2025, Ethiopia confirmed its first ever outbreak of Marburg virus disease in a town called Jinka in the south of the country. Over the following 2.5 months, the outbreak spread to 4 districts, infected 3 health workers, 2 of whom died, and ultimately claimed 9 confirmed and 5 probable lives, a case fatality rate of over 64%. The Ethiopian government, working with the World Health Organization, contained it completely. On January 26th of this year, the outbreak was officially declared over. It is, by any measure, a genuine public health success story. Fast, coordinated, effective. And it killed roughly 9 confirmed people. Tuberculosis kills more people than that in rural Ethiopia most weeks. This is the pattern this channel keeps finding. Country after country. The disease that makes the news and the disease that does the actual killing are very rarely the same one. Next, we're going to Ghana, a country whose public health success story has a catch that almost nobody talks about.